You're listening to A Creative Excuse, presented by Echo a Mano. We've been nominated for Best Gallery in Santa Fe by the Santa Fe Reporter. Yay! You have till May 31st to vote for us, as well as your other favorite Santa Fe locations. And if you're not in Santa Fe, you can still vote for us. Address to vote is sfreporter.com/BOSF. And we're in the Best Gallery category. Appreciate your vote. And you can find Echo a Mano on the web at echoamano.org. This episode is Alfred Darlington, aka Daedelus. Alfred is an electronic musician from Los Angeles. Been doing music, performing at electronic music in LA for 20 years, plus or minus. He's now on the faculty at Berklee College of Music in Boston, teaching electronic music performance. He has at least 20 albums out and worked with artists like Flying Lotus and Bus Driver. And if you're not familiar with his music, start from the beginning. There's a lot of different places he goes through his albums. Some are louder, some are quieter, some are really challenging, some are a little bit more ear-pleasing earworms. So he's definitely a sonic adventurer. The latest album is definitely on the louder side of things, pushing ideas about distortion and whatnot. At the very end of this conversation, you can hear a track from his latest album, What Wands Won't Break, which is coming out this Friday, May the 8th, which is also my 40th birthday. The track is called You and Me. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you enjoy this great conversation. And thanks for listening. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I, first off, just want to say that I really appreciate you as a creative person.
Thanks.
I was listening to some of your newest releases the past couple of days, and what reflected back to me, and has always, I think, reflected to me in your music, is that you're such an adventurer. Like you I think have a deep commitment to exploration, and it seems like you don't stay in a lane in the best possible way.
That's extremely kind of you to say. I have to admit that sometimes that comes from a restless place rather than like I'm so confident in the things that I'm doing that I can take chances. I can't. Yeah, that isn't me, but that isn't to say that I'm not proud of the efforts or energies. It's just something is unsolved, and so it keeps going. I always get intimidated by the amount of music out there. I mean, on a given day, there's lifetimes worth of audio released, much less things that demand our attention, much less worthwhile audio, which is probably a smaller percentage, but still, and to add to that din, that noise is a lot. But then, what else are we doing?
What we gotta do our thing. And I can totally relate to that. I mean, I kind of am the kind of person that jumps around a lot. I really like starting things. And I was talking to somebody a while ago about, just feeling a little bit like, oh, where's my commitment? Maybe I need to be more in depth. And she was like, you know what? You're like a midwife. You're not a pediatrician. You give birth to the babies and then you give them on their way, And I was like, yeah, I love that. I love that analogy, because we don't give midwives a hard time for not, taking care of toddlers,
Well, and they're people at this beautiful inception, and that in of itself is an extremely challenging job. But as a metaphor, what a beautiful metaphor for, you're at this moment of creation. You were there to ease this great difficulty, and then that in of itself is the act. That is in itself the entirety. We all would do better to kind of have an element of that, whereas rather than have to kind of stay stationary, right? Be someone's Quicksilver, get them all that creativity out their druthers.
Yeah.
But in a midwife way.
Yeah, right. I mean, I can totally see ways that like I can benefit from kind of digging in a little bit more and maybe plumbing the depths a little bit more of whatever I find myself in.
But really quick, is that you?
Yeah.
Is that because, I mean, I assume, and maybe much like myself, that I've had these aspirations, and some of them I have realized in turn are societal. Like, oh, I'm supposed to be doing this because an artist is this thing, the shape, the size, these kind of formats. And as I've dissuaded myself of a bit of that, partially because times have changed and some of my considerations have thusly altered, and also to see the world around us change. Especially right now. I mean, like, a lot of my construction of being a musician previously was playing shows. Like, if you're not intoning the audio, then it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist on a format, on a record or a tape or on a stream until it's being played loudly. And that's really being fundamentally tested right now in my definitions. Equally, like, how much of these thoughts that you have that you should be doing this or should be doing that come from your own, antagonizing, or is it comes from somewhere else? And I mean, not to say that we're ever without an inner and outer voice who shaped us, but it's kind of good to not hold yourself to too much, penalty.
It kind of feels like both. I think like there's definitely the pressure, the shoulds, and I think when I take away the should, there is a desire, I think, to dig deep and to like, what else can I pull out of this? But there also, I think some of the things that that the should comes from, I can also get by beginning something new. I mean, because there's a type of engagement that starting a new project elicits for me that just wanes over time. And like, for example, this gallery thing that I just started it like a year ago, and already I'm thinking about, okay, so what's the next thing that's going to happen here? And I think there, like, thank you for that urge, and at the same time, like, I recognize this thing is still in its infancy. So it's like I think there is a time for me where I have to like honor the fact that like maybe I am a little bit of a pediatrician. That it's okay, like. So
I hear you, but then I would also just ask too, how many of your endeavors do you have a clear goal in mind? Yeah. Like a clear outcome, right? Not many. And even with things where I know that I'll be done with a record, you'll be done with a record, right? Like something where it's like, okay, the shape, the format finishes it, right? Like you can't do any more touching on the canvas when it's out in the world. And so that it's going to be done, but at the same time, like there's so many more aspects to that process, and the art doesn't end when the record finishes. It's just there's no clear outcomes, and I wonder if that maybe is part of it here for you and for a lot of creative people out there, where we're creating because we need to create. We're solving some difficulty in our lives through this act. Something that was loose, some bolt that wasn't quite tightened enough as a child, or maybe as an older person, and the creativity helps solve some of that. But there's no, maybe in some ways I've always determined the end would be the end of me, not the end of it. Yeah. Maybe that's not fair, especially to all the crafts people out there. And I really admire craftsmen and artisans and those who make, because oftentimes they are they're doing creative things, but very much in the forge of an outcome. They're making sometimes minute choices because the format is so rigid, but they create in that kind of that kind of rare air of having a done in mind that's very clear and conceived, maybe even preconceived. Maybe they've already architectured it.
Yeah, I think taking that even a step further too, like I think about some of the potters I work with that, say have the goal of making the perfect pot, but they know it's impossible, right? So it's like that, keeping that impossible goal in your mind that keeps you like making those minute changes and like, but there's I think, something a little bit romantic about that, about having this idea of perfection while simultaneously knowing it's inattainable.
Well, you know what, you say that, but then I was visiting a pottery museum in Japan some time ago, and there was a vessel.
Some perfection.
Well, and that's the thing. There was a vessel in there that was made for I don't know if it was emperor or someone of a high mucky muck, right? Like somebody well up there that had wealth that was inconceivable to our minds. And there was a vessel in there that was seemingly plain looking, but one of the notes that they had in the translated description was that the vessel was made by this master potter, and that it was the only thing they ever made in their entire life. Not that they made multiples, they just made this one thing. And I don't know what that meant. I don't know if that meant that this was such a long process that it took their entire life to make, and that they, there must have been some learning, but then they created this thing, or if they made many things, but this was the only perfect thing that they made.
Yeah.
It's kind of haunted me to this day. If it was just badly translated, and then, this was the only thing that the emperor or other figure, the shogunate, whatever had, or if this was literally the one thing they ever made, and it just was that thing, that lifelong work, that assuming that, they came from a generation or generations of artisans, that maybe this was their offering. That was it.
Yeah. That's amazing. It makes me think of that, I don't know which painter said this, but somebody asked like, oh, how long did it take you to make that painting? And he was like 50 years. And he was like 50 years old. It's like if somebody asked you how long it took you to make your latest record and your answer was 42 years.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. It does seem like it's not an answer we can conceive of in our modern moment. Right. Yeah. As much as it's absolutely true, everything that has shaped us as creatives, everything that's kind of made our art artful, it doesn't seem like an apropos, like it doesn't jive with our philosophy of now as much as it's totally accurate. Yeah, why is that? Why can't we just take ownership or,
Yeah. Well, going back to like the kind of new ideas and sticking with these ones, I think that the thing is like I get so many ideas for new projects, and I also recognize this one isn't done yet. Like it doesn't feel done. It doesn't feel done for me, and at the same time, I'm excited by the prospects of these new ideas that are coming in. So it's like, how do I kind of balance that? Okay, I'll put this one in the hopper, but I know it's not quite done yet.
Sure. I mean, I guess the question I would have for you too then is this a vessel to which ideas get put, and therefore you can begin new things all the time in the vessel? Or is the vessel itself so much the art that you can't really reconnect with it based on a project that's within? It needs to be the entirety that needs to reshape. And, not to put things in mythical purposes too quickly, but the phoenix, this mythology of the phoenix has many, many cultures echo this idea. Obviously, phoenix as its own word it's kind of placed in a certain mythology, but then there's various versions of this rebirth. And like how much needs to die from your previous for you to feel like there's a new in your present?
Yeah, sure.
And so maybe, it's like maybe there's a formatting thing about the vessel, but also maybe there's a thing where it's just the you that needs to be changed, not the other.
Yeah. No, for sure. It's I think it's totally both. It's totally both.
Interesting.
Yeah, both and, great way to start. You're in Boston, right?
Yes. Yeah, very much.
And you've been there for how long now?
Since September in earnest. Like I arrived late August. So it's not a year yet. And it's certainly, as years go, this has felt like it's not even a year, but it's been many, many decades. Just in the sense of not only the previous statement of 42 years in the making, but also just like this has been such unusual everything.
Yeah.
I can't believe the entropy that's been involved in 2020 alone makes it feel like a lot longer period.
Have you lived, like had a home base in other places besides LA?
No, LA forever. LA was always.
Yeah. That's what
although
I figured. So
touring and traveling, but at most like a week or two elsewhere at most. And that's even, still as a visitor, still as it's not there. Always with an eye towards home being this very LA place.
Yeah. So like one of the things that I was thinking about is like, having a home base in such a new place, and then all of a sudden, boom, lockdown.
Yeah.
Like, does that challenge like your sense of home, or like is that an extra challenge for you in terms of having like a place to sort of sink in?
No, I mean, thankfully, a lot of the being here was a crash course in newness, not just for myself, but the students that I had. The program itself is doing a lot of changing. Berklee, so this is the school.
So you moved to start teaching?
Yeah, I moved to Boston to become a professor, an assistant professor is the technical term, but a professor of electronic music at Essence, but specifically electronic music performance at Berklee College of Music. And it's a new outgrowth for them. They've had an electronic program for a long time, but not so much in the performative sense. And so with that being the case, suddenly the school is in difference. And then Boston as a city is constantly reinventing itself with a cycle of every 4 years there's a new crop of students, or every year there's a new crop of 4-year, 5-year graduate students or whatever that are coming and invading the city. So I was just another part of that wave. There's like 66 schools in the city. Wow. And what makes this moment even also more perilous is, of course, there's 66 institutions. It's the majority, economy of Boston seems to be in education, and they're all on pause right now. They're all kind of curious on next steps, and it's different. But then also the students, discovering the city. So at times I would, as much as I've seen a lot of different things, I love the fact of maybe in the same way, like I've really come to cherish discovering the city through the eyes of people who've experienced it for a lifetime, but for many, many, many who are also getting it for the first. So being on lockdown is strange, but my partner moved out in February, and that's created a whole realm of possibility that was not. Yeah, I mean that's everything. It's everything to have.
Yeah.
Someone to hunker down with seems like right now. I feel very lucky in that regard.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
But in that same way, I now get to rediscover the city again, although. We're doing the self isolation quarantine thing. Still discovering the city through their eyes now gives me yet another renewed impulse, and I can't wait for things to be lifted and for them to really get out into the world too, potentially. So
yeah. And you're doing some remote sessions teaching. How is that?
Oh, I mean, all of it's remote, and it's tons. I have students as far away as China and Korea that, at like 3 a.m. they'll be tuning into the class, and it's challenging. I mean, I really do feel like the information is partially done in the in the realm of the senses, and it's just the computer distance doesn't make it as earnest, right? Like it doesn't quite have the same ring to it as being in a classroom, and both me witnessing the discoveries that are happening, where I'm taking sometimes what I feel like is familiar concepts and seeing it in, like basically being invented in the students in the way that they need to know it, and that's an incredible intoxicant. And then also sometimes finding bits of information that I never put together, never strung together, making a kind of popcorn necklace out of it for later for myself. And a lot of that happens in a room rather than happens in a chat room. But at the same time, this is the need and the necessity. And even now, I'm just grateful that we could like teleconference like this and talk across this vast difference. So.
Well, I mean, and that's like the conceit of this podcast has been like, this way for me to have conversations with people that on a day-to-day basis, I don't typically get the opportunity to, or I don't create the opportunities, actually being more honest about it, because it's like mostly folks in Santa Fe that like I might see at an opening, or it's an artist that I admire, but the most we ever say is, "Hi, how are you? See you later," and so this it's like my way of creating a container for having these types of connections and a creative excuse to say, hey, let's sit down and have a conversation
and a new beginning and a new thing to do. And that's totally in line with your with your path. It's great. But equally, I really appreciate the fact that you found a creative way to engage with this isolation, right? Rather than letting it become a silence, which some of us need. Some of us need a break and a pause. And this is all, there's a lot of precedent for having, pressing the pause button when you decide rather than the world decides, generally speaking. But for you to realize this is an opportunity for us to connect, I love that.
Yeah. There's a lot there. I mean, I felt really, sometimes I hesitate to talk about, like, I'm particularly feeling very inspired in this time. And there's a hesitation there because I know so many people are suffering and want to respect that. But at the same time, like, I also want to respect where I'm at too, and recognize that, like, the circumstances in the world to me right now is just like you said, opportunity. Like, that's the word that just keeps coming through for me, is just this incredible opportunity to just, like, stop and, like, check in. And, like, for me on a personal level, yes, like, where am I going? What am I doing? Is this where I want to put my energy? Reprioritize and, like, focus, because we are finite beings and our attention, can only do so much. But I also, of course, I don't have as much control over it, but it's an incredible opportunity for the world, for the country, for, any kind of multiple organisms, to do the same, to stop, pause, and check in. So I've been really inspired by that.
That's great. And I understand what you mean by it's tough. I mean, people are going through different levels of trauma, different levels of difficulty. Some in the most profound, their friends, their family, themselves sick and dying.
Yeah.
And it is really hard to witness that and not both be unmoored and abjectly, like, I can imagine wallowing. I can imagine being totally struck dumb by it, that, not an utterance, but at the equal time, it's like, if you've been an artist for a period of time, you've gone through life. I mean, there's definitely reasons that you are an artist, and also reasons you've sustained with your art. And oftentimes that is a self-medication. And so, if we can't reach for it if we only can reach for it under perfect circumstances, if we only can reach for the creative excuse when we're perfectly formed, that's not going to happen.
You froze.
Well, that's going to be a thing. There's a big storm outside, so it's exciting.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah.
I can't hear you.
Oh, really? Okay. Give me a second. I'm sure it'll come back. This will all be recorded, though. That's the thing that's funny, is you'll hear it later.
Oh,
yeah.
There you go. There you are.
Cool.
You froze for a minute.
Yeah, no, I'm not surprised. Unfortunately, there was a big storm outside, and this is all
really?
Yeah, it's one of these, like, maritime gales or something such.
Oh wow,
it's exciting, but and it's new for me being such a California person. It's like weather is something else that happens places like here, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. We had a snowstorm last night too.
What? Wow, yeah. Santa Fe putting on a springtime show. That's incredible.
Yeah, it was 70 degrees yesterday, and we got.
I love it.
That's like 7,500 feet.
It's all that ley line energy, though, too. It's all that.
That's right.
But
I don't know what you said when you were frozen.
Oh, I mean, I think I was kind of speaking on all the things that we do and we are as creatives, that necessitate the kind of, like, my thread was a little bit lost, but at the same time, we need this. It needs us. It's a bit of both, right? And so, now you've frozen, I think. Oh, dang. It's going to be like that.
Oh.
There you are. You're back.
If it happens again, maybe we should consider another method?
Maybe. Because I'm still recording on my side, and you're recording on your side. But
just a little bit of silence.
Yeah, it's going to be like these pockets that you might have to edit, I guess.
I will edit. Yes.
Yeah. Feel free. I mean, okay. So let's just let's roll the dice for a second. Let's just see if we can maybe one more time. I haven't had it this bad, generally speaking, but the internet might just die anyways. So then what are we going to do? Nice. Maybe make a song about it on, like, old timey instruments.
Yes.
I think there is a place that let's just call it a wellspring, right? There is some place where the thoughts come from, unbidden, and sometimes it is within us, but it's also outside of us. And that creative endeavor is something that we like journey to, we discover so much more than we bring forth, right? Like, I mean, we might uncover the stones, we might like show off how shiny and smooth they are, but we don't create stones ourselves. And in that same way, those kind of feelings we might have for compassion, and I mean, I think it's vital that we hone in on our emotional places, but I don't know how much we really do, other than we kind of sort out what's already happening. We just like shine bright lights. I know that's like getting off topic, but it's been in my head so much recently about like, what is there to do what is it to do in this kind of time of pandemic? Like, what are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing? And I find myself sometimes retreating into mythologies. I'll play video games. I'll read books, and I'll look up and kind of just like the world is spun, but nothing has happened, and we're still indoors. And that's the kind of story that I can tell myself. But I've been so many places during this break, during, you know, inside and outside, not physically, but, you know, spiritually or emotionally. It's been such a journey, such a, you know, I used to fixate on this idea that I was an ancillary character in someone else's hero's journey. Specifically, it was usually partners would like invent me for their usage, what they needed, and I was so happy to play that part, to play a cameo in someone who I found special's lives. And I don't know, maybe it's changed over the years, but there's something to it, something about serving a purpose. Especially one that has meaning beyond my purpose. It can be a very comforting thought sometimes.
That's been coming up big time for me, for sure. Because like, and the thing, and I was talking to somebody about this yesterday, that I feel like one of the biggest things that I'm not learning so much as putting into practice more something that I already knew. How much I have relied upon work, quote unquote, but just like the things that I do in general for a living, but are in that container of creativity, how much I rely upon that for my sense of purpose and meaning and reason for just being in the world. And what I've known, and this has been a lifetime practice or long time practice, is that I want those things to actually support a deeper meaning and purpose, rather than that deep meaning and purpose supporting the work. And it's a subtle distinction, but to me it's a huge flip of perspective, because it's like the things that I do outwardly in terms of creativity and inwardly that make those things happen, but those are just the vehicle. You know, it's like these are like you said, this role that I play in this particular lifetime, where it's like I get to do these things. These are the things that I've attuned myself to that allow me to understand the world. And I think that's getting a little bit closer to that. To me, what I want to hone in on, that deeper meaning and purpose. And there is a sense of service in that. There is a sense of wanting to be of service to an ideal that's greater than just my own ego, you know.
It's such a nice thought. I wonder if we ever can truly escape ourselves, right? These like ego traps and these other issues that we are so much brought to bear on, right? And like going back to trauma, not to you know, stay in that place, but it is such a modality, right? Like we are, you know, traumatized at birth, right? Let's just say like traumatized by the bright light of things, even just the separation of senses that we've encountered as young people, as very young people, as infants, like that's left us less in the world, right? And, you know, sometimes I wonder, I kind of wish I could philosophize more and understand it, but just we have this like imperfect like pinhole camera view that flips some of these things on their head and gives us this one insight. And that's like, again, usually from a creative place, at least for myself, it's this like one insight into creativity that I feel so grateful to have played a part in. But I do really realize that it's just a tiny hole in a piece of paper that is like showing me such a small slice of what's actually happening. It's it's the tiniest thing. Yeah.
When I was hiking with Kara a while back, actually we've actually been able to get out and hike a little bit, which is really nice. But she was using this metaphor of like wearing like a completely opaque mask and then like having little pinholes being popped in the mask. And it's like you see this one bright little light, and it is kind of like, you know, it is a part of the whole, but you're only seeing that minute, you know, little beam of light coming through, even though it comes from this much larger source, you know. And it's like part of that practice of like learning to see, I think, in a greater way, is allowing those pins to come through a little bit more pinholes in the mask.
Well, and then two things I would add to that. Like, so I've been doing, and this is a weird gig, but I love it. I've been an artist in resident at SETI since September, and I'll do more work directly with them once we're not socially isolated. But as it stands, though, think of it this way: like we get that one beam of light in this kind of same metaphor, right? And so if we're to use that idea of this kind of blinders, that we get this one beam, that's the exact same thing that SETI is dealing with, right? SETI is scanning the entire universe, looking for minute details that might describe differently than this kind of, basically be like small beams of light amidst of a lot of darkness. And they do so much with it. They, you know, there's such a richness that you can figure if you just get the angles and maths right. Suddenly you can tell if you're receiving radio waves from habitable planets and distant galaxies, and it's a matter of just formatting and perspective. Like what you do with the light there, is it a matter that you only see the majority darkness, and then that one beam of light is just, you know, that's the only detail to notice, is the fact that you've broken apart the darkness? Or is it more so that, you know, the darkness becomes not the field of vision at all? It's just that those tiny points of light that become the totality over once you see the right way to format it. There's something in that.
I think, like, for me, like, let's continue to play with the metaphor. Like, for me, like, the ability to also let go of those particular beams of light, like a particular point of view or truth, is so key for me in like getting a broader viewpoint, of course, right? It's like being able to say like, oh, this is a really wonderful point of view. This is a really beautiful beam of light. What is this one? What is this beam of light? And I think like, and I think, and coming back to your music, I think you do that with your music. I think you do get into like, okay, I've played with this beam of light for a while. What's this one? You know, what's like, I was listening to Bitter Enders today.
Nice.
And that one, like, I mean, there's such a departure there in terms of just like a lot of the other albums you've done, but I think just that willingness to dive in, you know, to be like, what is this one? What is this little piece here?
Well, that's your willingness, and for me, I don't know if I have the choice, right? There was certain references that they're not pre-written by any means, but I'm doing my best to represent them, and then, you know, also I just want to bring up this idea too, and I think Pauline Oliveros talks about this lightly, and then I'm trying to do more research myself, but this idea of quantum listening, where not only are you entangled with the object that you are like watching or listening or interacting with, but you are also affecting it upstream. So even though maybe the punctured darkness, your perception of that light also affects the light source going back out, assuming that there's much more light beyond the blinders. Just that tiny insight of light not only changes you and your viewpoint, but also changes the outside world in subtle ways that we can't totally determine, especially if you look at it from a cosmic scale. It starts to tip things. It's the butterfly effect, but in like a very different fashion. And so should we really reach for ripping away the blinders entirely? And like, that seems like it would de-emphasize what the beauty is, especially in their like individual perspectives. We'll just get like a wash, a totality. So maybe it's worth really cherishing our limited viewpoints to stand a little taller for, you know, stand a little bit brighter in there, or, you know, in more contrast maybe, rather than having just a flood.
And I think like what you said about that quantum entanglement, I think for me, I mean, that's something that can be hard to remember, you know, and in terms of like how do I have an impact, on this planet, you know. And, you know, because I mean, if you consider if everybody on the planet all of a sudden decided, okay, I'm going to be a compassionate, peaceful person, we'd have a compassionate, peaceful planet.
Yeah.
Duh. But it's like everything that we incorporate into our lives and how we interact with the world has an effect on the world, on people. You know, if I go out and if I'm in a cheery mood and I'm smiling at people, I can really see an effect. Yeah. You know. And if I'm feeling like a dud and I'm going through the grocery line and be like, that person reflects that back, you know? And it's like, I think that moment shows me like I'm having an impact.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I can see that. And I think sometimes performatively displaying your emotions is really important. It's one thing to have the rationale and reasonableness to sit in your emotions. That's great. And, you know, to own it, or to be able to not solve it, but to, you know, let it be part, right? Like it's very human to feel, and it's human to have your relationship to these things, but equally to kind of have a sense of how it performs and how it acts and plays out. It's one of the conclusions that I've been coming to quite a bit in both teaching performance and then kind of really internalizing a lot of what I've done previously as a performer. So much of it is just feeling joy on stage and just willing to have that come through the limbs and the music and the face. And in some ways it's way louder than the music itself. It's just that kind of willingness to be there with it. And much the same way, it's like I appreciate that you have a performative kind of outcome where you can smile and you can give that to somebody and they can decide to do with it what they will. Yeah. But equally to be able to have, it's like, it's not just the ability to kind of smile at somebody, have them smile back, but to like really have something radiating from you. And sometimes that's pathos, sometimes it's bathos, you know, these kind of like phrases from ancient Greek philosophy that has to do with feeling deeply the sorrow, feeling deeply the kind of pain and anguish, and being able to display that in ways that people understand is equally powerful and useful and needed, especially right now.
Yeah.
So, you know, I love the fact that you're owning that space. I know for myself, I don't have the easy smile. It doesn't, like, it feels like when it comes from a genuine place, it's real, but like I don't know how to like affect it or turn it on. But I do I adore it when people do, and can kind of be good lighthouses. It's really kindness in like the profound way.
Yeah.
To be in the space of that is just, it's nice.
So going back to teaching a little bit, I know that I think about if I were to be transported into a classroom and be like, okay, you're the teacher now. I'd be like, oh shit. Okay. It's hard for me to conceptualize that. Was that a leap for you, or have you taught before?
I mean, I did master classes and I did kind of performance examples. I would go to a school and kind of like, hey, this is what, you know, electronic music sounds like, and people, or like, what do you think electronic music sounds like, and kind of not necessarily just lecture, not just in tone, but like try to engage in conversations. And I think as a lifelong learner myself, I had a certain conception of what teaching was or being taught, and especially as someone, I have dyslexia, and as having some learning disability that goes way back and kind of formed a lot of my opinions about my own intelligence or my own aptitude, let's say. It really colored in some of the ways that I used to think about myself, or still do think about myself. I can't help it. And so teaching was wrestling with a lot of that. Like, can I do this from a place where I feel compromised? But also, am I capable of owning this material that I find I'm still discovering so much in? Like, I can't, I don't feel solved or finished with it. So and then of course being here and meeting the other teachers and seeing the level to which people are imparting information, and sure, there were some hard facts that you can like point towards, but largely invented. We invented music theory at some point to describe a classical system that had a Eurocentric classical system that had been instilled, and you know, and it did a very good job of imparting that thing, and it works to describe many other systems, but it isn't by any means a total system. And it's funny, as much as we know, we esteem it to be like solved somehow because we know all the relationships of 12 tones, as if that somehow describes music. It's crazy, but it's, you know, it's useful enough. And
more so than like probably like science and mathematics. Like, would you say like there's a sense of like, oh, we got this done?
I mean, there's a sense of that, but I think when you really start to see it for what it is, it's just gracing this, you know, like it's a bird flying by a mountain, gracing with its wing, you know, the side of it. It's like, it's almost meaningless in terms of the way it approaches sound, but at the same time, it's useful enough, and it's like language. I mean, there's all metaphors here. We're all talking in these, like, you know, hieroglyphics that thankfully we all, you know, we have some sort of sense of understanding, but the idea that we're really speaking is still kind of marginal compared to some of the other profound experiences that we might share, or that we have. Like, we've been in shows together. Like, just simply being in that space, I think, is, you know, not to say this conversation isn't valued. I very much do. It's just a different thing.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that we've had both modalities, let's say.
Totally.
But teaching, back to teaching, I as long as I'm, and much like I was describing in terms of performance, as long as I'm really like discovering, I'm having eureka moments myself, I feel like, I mean, selfishly perhaps, but I do feel like the students get a lot out of that. And I think when I equally witness it, there's like a nice feedback loop from the students. When I witness that from the students, it's like there's such a feedback loop that can happen where we could, you know, take really complicated, tough to describe things and find something profound, even if it's in that just like moment of what, you know, what can we make the computer do? What can the sound do? How does it make us feel? These things that can be very nebulous and very abstract at times.
Right.
Yeah, and being willing mostly to like put ourselves at the altar of it. Seems like a lot of what teaching is. Yeah. Just, you know, prostrating ourselves.
Yeah.
It sounds a little bit darker when you say it that way, but yeah, it's true.
I have to imagine it involves like a bit of humility as well, right? Like, I mean, because you're being asked to come to this stage because you have a level of expertise, but yet at the same time, like, I'd have to imagine in a certain way you have to put that aside to kind of tease out the whatever is in the students.
Yeah. And you know, the funny thing is I think a lot of teachers that I've worked with, a bit here and elsewhere, they feel like they need to command the room. They need to hold authority. And I just can't imagine that. I can't imagine standing there and saying that you know the thing. Yeah. It's, you know, I would much rather tell the students that I'm still on my journey, and I'm this 42 years deep, and I still, you know, there's a million more things to do and be said and heard here, than to think that there's a solved system that once you get through these, like, you know, 4 years, 4 walls, somehow you were going to have the secrets of. It's both seems like a deception, but also why would you want to do a profession that ends before it's begun? Yeah. I mean, I've said this a lot on the podcast, but like art school, you know, didn't teach me anything about how to be an artist, you know, in a practical sense. You know, it's like you're in an isolated environment, you know, with the same people for a number of years, and then you graduate, and then it's like, okay, there you go be an artist. It's like, what do I do? Where's my incubator? And I think that especially in a creative field, I mean, it's all about, I mean, in any field, it's all about the relationship. And if it, you know, I think it can become, you know, stultifying when you think about it as a solved system, when it's just like, this is about math rather than my relationship to math, or relationship to everybody or the globe or whatever, but like, or that this is about music rather than about our relationship with music. Just remember, there's that whole music theory thing is solved as maths, right? They present it as being some, you know, perfect relationship between notes, and they kind of don't talk too much about tempered tuning, because of course you need tempered tuning to solve the issues with the 12-tone system. And like, you know, it's like there's all these holes that are apparent and easy, but then you just gloss that over and you focus in on what seems like perfection. And of course, you know, if that was the case, we'd all be writing perfect songs and everything would be forever. And of course, it's not the case. There's something else at play. And the one song in the museum, right, that's in the case, and it's like, I only made this one song in my lifetime, and it was perfect. Right. I mean, hey, one-hit wonders of a different era.
Right.
But I do think teaching. The other thing about teaching is that it is really fun to figure out together with the students what is demonstrable, what is demonstratable, what can you actually do in the 30 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours, what can really be expressed. Even as, knowing that there's a lifelong learning at play, what is the kind of eureka that can happen in like a single moment where the puzzle pieces get, come together, the idea gets fulfilled, and you make a quantum leap that bounds you into a place that you've never been before, and you never can go back to innocence, right? Like your clam is shucked, so to speak. I love that, and to be part of that on a almost daily occurrence is very intoxicating, but also, like I said, but equally there's a profundity in what teaching can provide in that regard. Like if only we were teaching that as a constant, I think throughout all of education, I think things would be very different, both the way we face education, but also how many people are creatives out there, how many people feel permission to create, how many people feel like they have something to say or offer to the conversation.
Yeah. My mom's a teacher. She does dyslexia intervention actually in Houston, and so she tutors a small. Well, right now it's converting to online, of course, but it's been a small group of students, and like 5 to 10 students, and a lot of them are ESL students, English second language. And for her, what she tries to bring to it is just being a loving presence. She's like, my job is not to teach them anything. I'm not there to get them good grades on the test. That's part of the process that we go through, is to fulfill these sort of requirements that the school district has. But my job and my practice and why I'm there is to just be a loving presence. And I loved that, because it's like it I guess I'm just reflecting it back to what I said earlier about flipping the script in terms of do I serve work or does work serve me, kind of thing.
Yeah, I would add to that too. Being a loving presence it can be so profound, both because we have a concept, each of us probably have a concept of what that can be it because we've had a lack of loving presence or we've had an abundance of loving presence, which are, both valuable, things of value to have in our lives, to have concepts of what being a presence and someone else's or having presence in our lives, be it lack or, vacuum or fulfillment. And I think it's wonderful how your mom approaches things, and we all could probably do well by doing that, and equally to like be able in our art to express a little bit more of that sublimity would probably be useful. It's tough, right? Like what a reach, what a thing to like ask of your art, to like be a persistent love, just irregardless of what the content of the lyric or the harmony is. But
because that doesn't look a certain way. I think sometimes we might have this sense that a loving presence means saccharine, and that doesn't mean that at all. In my point of view, anyway, is that a loving presence can be firm and disciplined. It can be angry. It can be, sweet. It can be all those things.
And certainly music, or whatever art we're speaking of, can have all those aspects.
Yeah.
And should have, perhaps, maybe we need less of a monoculture and more of a polyculture that encounters all of the discomforts and pleasures and, gives it an artful spin that, creates perspective, right? Creates a more rich environment.
Here.
Yeah. And that was the second detail I was going to say about the points of light, is that we need art more than ever in the now, and in these kind of like, even in the metaphor, the simile, because we need to not only describe the physical experience of now, but we need to give it not just purpose to proceed and to repopulate. I mean, that seems like pretty base, but the art gives us the energy to not only describe, but also just exist in this. And maybe, those points of light as jarring or as fulfilling, as embracing, as loving, as destitute, or whatever way that we tend to face this kind of encroaching energies. It's like if we could just make it all more artful, we'd have such a better relationship with our reality.
So you're teaching performance. One of the things that I think is kind of a lot of people probably have asked you about this, but just in terms of like the difference between the sounds that come out on performing on stage and the sounds that come out on recordings, that one of the challenges I found when I was making music was getting out of the space of like, how am I going to perform this song? Right? I would be like, composing something, and it would get in the way. It would get in the way of this, like, okay, I really hated that that sense of like, oh, I've got to figure out how to make this work in a performative way. And I have to imagine you have to really put those thoughts aside and just focus, okay, this is a recording.
I mean, I usually try to tell the students, at least, I can tell you what I tell the students much, like different than what I tell myself, let's say. So I'll start with the students. I talk to them about manipulating time. Like when they are in the studio versus performing, there are different time scales. One is the time scale of, sure, you have, the song exists over a frame of reference, right? Like it would be noise without time. With time, we can have song. And so in the studio, there's a certain improvisation, there's a certain kind of linearity that exists, but you also are able to be very nonlinear. You're able to jump around in the space, and time has a different reference, versus in the performance, there's an instilled linearity. Even if you are going to be moving around the sounds, there's still time is very adamant in its purpose. And so you have to succumb a little bit to that procession. And yet at the same time, you can still, through the kind of trick of sound, you can like move people's attention, you can reformat it. It can be a magic trick. The studio just gives you different insights into that. So different modalities, but you're still, like arbitrarily, abjectly, you have this kind of burden. For me though, I noticed that so what I tell myself, let's say, for me, I noticed my successful nights, the ones that were really well performed, didn't exist in time or space. Just was a happening, and I woke up suddenly from a dream like state, and the show was done. There was no effort or energy to it. It's just happening. And then equally in the studio, when I have these occasional moments where I feel slightly touched by the muse or visited by the music or whatever, and it's like there's no time or space, like the flow thing or whatever you want to call it is just happening in full. And so time is absolutely necessary to make the music go, and yet here's this moment where when it feels good, there's no time. I don't know exactly how to reckon that for the students, so I try to bring things in more as these two modalities and let them, rather than have to feel like, well, how am I going to actually action this live, and more just think about, well, how am I going to make this faster to get to? What are the ways that I'm going to like lower the hurdles, lessen the barriers, to make it so that I can get to the sound faster, because I need to have a certain expedience to keep up with the time scale that's going to be in effect performing. So it's, there's economies of motion and choreography and all these different ideas that come into play. But then I have a harder time expressing to them my inner truth, where it's like, when it feels good, you can do anything. There's just no barriers. There's no even knowing how you did it. You just got there. I mean, sure, you can put yourself in the way of success and you can give yourself good tools, but I've seen people perform incredibly with a pair of spoons or a single string. It's like, who's to say what
who's the great string player out there?
There's a lot of really limited string instruments, especially in Southeast Asia.
Right. Yeah.
Just like a one string and a bendy thing, and it's like, goodness gracious.
Berimbau and
oh God.
Yeah.
That thing too.
Well, would you say that, what you perform live, most of it, if maybe not 90% of it, is not your own songs? Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's different time periods. Up until 2008, I only played basically my own material.
Yeah.
And then starting in late 2008, I switched entirely to playing other people's material because I didn't like that idea of time distension of my own material. I didn't like the way I had to change the mood of it. I was playing louder and larger rooms, raves and festivals. And I took music that I used to think of as being very intimate and very much like a whisper and making it louder and more. And it just changed the way I approached creating, partially in that kind of esteem of, well, I need to play this stuff live. This is what people, they pay to somehow have a sing-along moment with an existing song, right? That's weird enough. But if you really think about the concerts you go to, it's a kind of karaoke. Not you and I, but just saying like one in general. When you think of a concert, you think of a band you like. You want them to play their big songs as if it, you know, maybe it's different in a choir of voices, sure, but it's a kind of karaoke. Getting your breath involved is a big thing, but either way, so you know, be it singing someone else's song or just dancing so hard that you have to breathe it out is worth it. But yeah, so I would start to play other people's music, but still try to put it through the lenses, right? Like take the enormity of the material and reckon it down to, well, what's my emotional insight into this other song, be it a single word or refrain or a whole song that when mashed or mixed with something else would create something different. I mean, I've been obsessed with the kind of idea of alchemedial processes for a long time. And I think there is no art that it has that more present than music, where you can take a note that, again, we can describe through music theory as being like an A at 440 hertz, and it is exactly of this quality and timbre, and these are the overtones and the period of the wave, and you can describe it, and then you hear it, and it is something else. I can tell you all these things, I can describe it to you in great detail, but then when I play you the note, it is something else. And by playing it with a series of other notes, it becomes gold. It absolutely can be transformed into something very treasured that you will hold on to for a lifetime. Potentially, not probably one of my records, but some record that you listened to when you were 14 probably still is echoing in your ears. And that's a kind of gold. That's a kind of alchemy there that is precious. So playing other people's music was a way to free myself from my own paradigms, but also try to mine what is like valuable, right? Like what do we hold on to? What is needful?
Yeah. Well, I think it's also notable that you didn't necessarily find, quote unquote, find the right rooms, you know, to play, you know, the tunes that you were making for your records.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
yeah, I guess that would have been another option.
But I mean, it's not no judgment or right or wrong, but it's like, it's interesting. But I mean, it allows you, I think, another range of expression, which you clearly enjoy.
Yes.
And, you know, so that much is evident.
No, and I don't know if, I don't think if you would ask me in 2008 if I would have enjoyed it, I think I would have probably disagreed. It's just, that's where the music lived, loud. And of course, you know, no matter if I was making the right music, I still wanted to be in those spaces and to, like, you know, experience it properly. Maybe as a long-term wallflower, I longed for, you know, being somewhere in that dance and feeling comfortable. But yeah, I mean, this idea that there was potentially a space for me as an artist, I think many, many, many people have it much more profoundly than I do, of not having spaces that are welcoming them, not having rooms, the warm room experience, which is to say there is a space that is already on the verge of laughing, already on the verge of dancing. It just needs you to topple over one of the dominoes and it goes.
Yeah.
And that is a rare experience and very much held for people of a certain privilege.
Yeah.
So, and even though I have definitely a lot of keys to the kingdom, I still feel very adrift and far away from that space of cool or that space of enabled. And I feel really grateful that, you know, I found my back doors and secret entries and I picked some locks and all that stuff.
Well, I mean, you're in the middle, well, maybe not in Boston, but in LA, you're in the middle of from an outsider, seems like an incredibly rich ecosystem. I mean, I only became aware of, you know, I guess what people call, you know, beat music. I don't know what that means, but like, I only became aware of it in like 2009-ish.
Sure. Yeah.
And so does it seem like, I mean, so you've lived in LA all your life. Was that initial sort of influx and continuing sort of creative ecosystem, is that unique? Has that always been there? Have I just not been aware of it?
No, it is a relatively new outgrowth. I mean, LA certainly has its vital pockets of community and ones that in some ways the reason why they are so special is because they were cloistered and held at bay. You have places in LA like Leimert Park, where I don't think if someone from outside of LA talked about the city, they would necessarily mention it within the first top 10 places to visit in the city. But it is such a bastion of like free, well, largely Afrocentric, but free thought, and especially jazz and hip hop. It was literally where the Good Life Cafe, where Project Blowed happened in the 90s. And these, again, are names that may not be familiar to you, but it's the blueprint for the city that creates this possibility. Now, before that, you had all these interesting creative outgrowths, and you had things like Acid House being partially, like, the first time it set down in America was at art galleries in LA, and same for things like freestyle music and like people like Egyptian Lover and that kind of sound that we mostly associate with Miami had a big like reason it existed because of LA. And so you have, and then a variety of other kind of scenes and sounds that have their birthplace. Now for the beat scene itself, it was like that hip hop scene that existed in Leimert Park and other places in LA that didn't necessarily escape LA, but gave us things like the Far Side, Souls of Mischief in part, even though they were from the Bay. You just have these kind of 90s classic groups that were better known, but like the kind of Good Life and the kind of the cypher thing was really important, and that had a whole group of beat makers that supported that. Now at the end of the 90s, with the end of kind of MCing as a popular style, you have a thing where those same beat makers went on to forge identities that were outside of having a voice creating their reality, or basically being just the vessel. They became literally the vehicle.
Yeah.
And that took a few generations, let's say, of those beat makers kind of coming and going to birth people who we probably have a more name brand recognition, people like Flying Lotus, or the huge variety of others who kind of were birthed essentially as instrumental hip hop makers, but then found way more purpose and at essence something much deeper than just being a platform. And much like jazz in that same regard, part of the reason the beat scene word stuck is because it does so much source back to this moment in time where the music changed and the way we regarded it, rather than being tied to a tradition of Tin Pan Alley and the Great American Songbook, to people writing their own music for their own purposes that spoke to their reality, their existence, rather than some sort of film or movie kind of versioning.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it's so clear that there's like so many different things coming together in that scene where you have the hip hop, you have the rap element, you have the electronic music and dance elements. You have I don't know. There's something there's like you said, alchemy. No. There's some alchemy going on there,
and it's way deeper too. I didn't mention all the other scenes in America. Things like in Atlanta and in Texas, there was experimental electronic. There was in Florida, there was schematic records. There was the whole barn rave scene. I mean, all these disparate threads kind of really found a nexus, both in LA because you had a lot of people moving there for a variety of purposes. Has always been the case. People not only moving to retire there, but moving for creative outgrowths that can support them so that they can propose their independent art. I mean, that city seems to be so abundant in that kind of realm of possibility. And of course, now it's tested like none other. But it does seem like, because maybe the space of the place gives it some extra advantage, so it doesn't suffer the same consequences as in New York, which is also seen as being such a creative place where people are on top of each other with ideas. But pandemic or not, it's challenging. I mean, just the current reality of like economic crisis for creatives. Yeah. You would have imagined that we would have come out of the aughts and the confusion of the music industry and like the way that the record industry was overturned. You would have imagined that we would have come out of that stronger through the potential of streaming or the potential of some sort of online offering that spoke directly to fans. But if anything, we've moved so far away from a decentralized speaking place where you can't make your own platform anymore. It's like, there was all these people in the early aughts that kind of created their own like websites and platforms and got people to rally around and had mailing lists, and it seems like most of that is pretty impossible at this point.
Yeah.
I can't imagine having, you know, driving traffic away from an Instagram or a Twitter. It seems perhaps impossible, but also, you know, maybe that's just the limitations of my imagination. I'm not here for that stuff, right? I'm here to make some music. I'm not here to reinvent the music ecosystem. I
think there's got to be something that we can't imagine that can enable that. There is.
Oh, there is 100%. The fact that we even can say the words out loud. You know, are you right. There's a weird. It's like one of these like Murphy's Law kind of things. But there is the science fiction principle. It's not called that. It has a different name. Basically, once something's been in science fiction, as far flung as it seems, it tends to get invented not too long from then. Things like the communicators in Star Trek, or, you know, these kind of ideas of black holes, or the robot in, you know, the golem or whatever.
Yeah.
They tend to get made, and partially because, well, it's like, well, as much as we think of these people inventing these far-flung realities, well, really not so much. Like we get held up on ideas, and those ideas get turned and turned around until they become true. And so maybe just us talking about it here will start being part of that pressure wave, or we're already part of the pressure wave that will change.
Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, so many people in my peers, my community are talking about community, are talking about, like, I feel like I'm in the process of recognizing more clearly the communities that are already present in my life that, you know, maybe I didn't take advantage of as much as I could have before, or embedded within. And I know that, like, this sense of being isolated or you know, being quarantined is, I think, making a lot of people think about communities and what it means to be a part of a community. And it's not being a part of Instagram. It's not being a part of a corporation's community, you know. It's like, what is the community that we're already a part of that isn't about making a profit for a corporation, you know? And so I feel like again, coming back to the inspiration of this time, like, there's a rich potential, I think, to visualize or to recognize or to give birth to these ideas that we've maybe tossed around for a while and being like, what are we doing? What, you know, like, we can do this a different way. We can do this a better way.
Yeah, absolutely. You know? And, you know, may it be that every single new offering we have is another testament to the fact that it doesn't have to be done a certain way.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to sound a certain way. It doesn't have to look a certain way. It doesn't have to be commercialized immediately. It doesn't have to make ends. We don't have to participate in the economy of widgets. I think it's very good and very prescient to recognize our power as individuals, but more so the power of our collective imagination. Yeah, for sure. Dang. Well, thank you so much for this.
Yeah. Do you want to touch on the new release? You've got a new album coming out on May 8th. Yeah. It sounds kind of like maybe it'll be a little bit more like the sounds you make performing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it isn't like I intended that way. I actually had something profound happen to me a while ago that was put through some lenses more recently by a certain writer of all things. Again, I'm dyslexic, so I have sometimes a hard time reading, but this writer, Trisha Rose, wrote a book called Black Noise, and it put some of my experience in LA specifically into clarity, especially in loud spaces. So I had always had such a trouble in loud rooms, partially because it wasn't my modality. And Trisha says this much more eloquently, but basically there is an instilled idea of the noise floor. If you're familiar with this idea of like where the noise sits in a space. Now this might be, if you're in a natural environment, this might be the sound of birds and maybe the distant hum of an airplane, things that are barely in your consciousness or maybe very present, but still maybe not very loud, versus in an urban environment, how not just the traffic, but the kind of heartbeats of people around you kind of all contribute to your noise floor. So this kind of idea that
hi,
nice to see you. This idea that well, I guess for lack of a better term, I would be playing these shows and I would have DJs on before, specifically Ross G in this case. He was always so much about this. He would come into the room and just turn everything up to just redlining, just the most gain, the loudest structures, and he would just bang on the sound system as if it was like an anvil, and you'd be hitting it with his SP404 or whatever. And I remember at times being like, how can I compete with this? How can I, there's no louder to go. Like, this is a certain kind of energy, a certain kind of, and it's like, what is there to be done? And of course, there's other clever ways to mitigate that. You bring things back down quiet, it build excitement in other ways. So it isn't like I was angry at them just for that, but it was just like, it seemed undue. It seemed out of the box. It seemed loud in a different way. And it took kind of understanding, well, what that really means. Like, well, there's certain music, there's a certain idea of art that needs to be done louder, needs to be made fuller. And oftentimes this has to do with the way we perceive good and bad, right? We kind of give an idea that good is something that is tucked away and kind of fits neatly. And then you have this other thing that's just cantankerous. And I think the world of rock has encountered that for years, this kind of idea of the distortion pedal or the overdrive or the up to 11. But it's become such a trite cliche, and just the fact that rock doesn't exist in many ways, at least as like a rebellious act of a youth cult, like, what have we, what? But this idea of overdriven just doesn't exist really for us. Our noise floor has gotten so loud, our world has gotten so clamorous. I was really eager and interested in finding ways to exceed. And so not only through the music itself, I stripped things back down to these like sinewy rhythms and beats, and kind of genre play of like looking at like what the anatomy of some of this music is, but then pushed it to ungainly degrees using like some just tricky audio business in Ableton, and just like pushed, tried to find places where the music was kind of falling apart at the seams. The sweater is fraying and coming undone. And I'd rediscovered something in myself about it. And again, through the kind of gift these people gave me, where it was like, I was at first put off by this kind of loud, and then I'm not saying that everything should be, I'm just saying that there's some things that for their own purpose need to be at a certain volume. And it kind of, it breaks a little bit the algorithm. It pushes at things like Spotify and like the kind of the dB meter of the world that wants things to be kind of, there's this slur that's used often, where, especially when we take someone that we don't expect to be eloquent and we call them so, right? We say something is surprisingly well spoken. Yeah. Right. And what an incredible, devastating attack that is, right? Like, what a profound way of being like, of both, like, such a backhanded compliment, right? Such a terrible, often racially tinged, but it can be used in a variety of circumstances. And it has everything to do with like our perceived idea of like our self-imprisonment. And there's so much to this record that's trying to take on aspects of that, and amongst other things, but that's the loudest of it. Is definitely trying to exactly serve up this idea of what is polite noise versus profound noise. And then there's some other ideas of magic and otherwise that I think also has to do with what is put forward and versus what is...
The wand reference.
Yeah. And how wands factor in the tarot deck, and how they have a role in popular culture of a certain kind that I think, again, like, culturally speaking, we have totems in most magic systems or cultures, or most religious systems, iconography, totems, these ideas, foci, all these different words for this thing. But it largely goes unchallenged about what the things are in our lives that we've decided to be shamanic, that we, it's like, might as well have our phones be doing a lot of the same function. We've certainly given them our brains and our most of our fingers, but, and our ears now too. So, so there's a kind of implicit question / statement in the title, what wands won't break. Yeah. It has to do with that, and it has to do with loud, and it has to do with, I should mention that Ross G, who the figure that I mentioned, passed away some time ago. And that one caught me off guard because he seemed to be from a lineage that was a forever kind of person, kind of showed up ancient minded and certainly did a lot of profound while he was present. Yeah. And his music is still there, it's still moving, it's still happening. Mm-hmm. It's just now we don't get the next quote, we don't get the next reasoning.
Yeah.
And I wish they were a little bit louder still.
Yeah. And then the last thing I ask everyone, if you can think of, in your case, a piece of music or an album or an artist that kind of, I'm sure there's a lot of examples, but really changed your understanding of music and what it could do, or changed you, kind of like a turning point sort of artist that was like, you heard it and like you said, that quantum, you could never go back.
Yeah. And I do have too many of those. I'm so grateful that it still happens, that I still get visited by that.
Maybe an early one.
Yeah, one of the earliest ones was Charles Mingus, right? I think I had one of his greatest hits comps, which is so ridiculous that things get repackaged. But and this is something that echoed back to me much later in life. But as a bass player, as a young bass player, as an aspiring bass player, he didn't play like anyone else, and it took a longer period of time to find out that indeed Charles Mingus started as a cello player, and for a variety of reasons had to switch because maybe the instrument wasn't seen as being seemly or wasn't a popular instrument at the time, and double bass was something that fit into orchestras or groups or ensembles, especially jazz. And so you have this different kind of player, this different energy that happens, and what an offering of an output, like what a bizarre everything from orchestral kind of gestures to very serious jazz. And yeah, there's one record in particular called Money Jungle that had him encountering these jazz legends, these like Max Roach and some other players, and Duke Ellington, right, on keys, and like just like a trio. And it sounds so much like they're having a fight in the room over these songs. It distends like the notion of what music kind of wanted to do, not in a fusion way, not in a way where they were taking on conventions of audio, but like in a way that every player brought so much to the table, had such personality, but like left a unified whole, like a little testament. I could go on and on. There's so many songs, but
that's a good one.
That artist changed me, and not always for the better. I think one thing I will say is that growing up in the 90s, where I really like cut my musical teeth, there was a lot of quiet and loud. And I always thought it was so funny that people were like, wow, like the Pixies invented this, or or Nirvana did this so well, the quiet verse and the loud chorus kind of thing. And it's like, just listen to jazz. Like this happens all the time. Like the bass player takes a solo and it gets like minutely quiet, and then all of a sudden the horns come in and we get back to loud. Like these are like the basic modality, like the building blocks of
go back
ensemble play.
Classical, Beethoven, it's like.
But you know what? I mean, you repackage it, make it spicy and new, and it's its thing. But Mingus, get some Mingus up in your ears.
Yeah, that was another guy that I did an episode with earlier on. That was his as well.
Really?
I forget what the album was, but it was one that he said was one of his most aggressive.
Wow. There's a few. They definitely had a muscular playing style, especially considering the cello was in the mix. But kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I like the fact too that he took to task the wooden thing rather than the electric. It sounds big, and it's just not because it's been distended or amplified. It's like the hands on the thing.
Yeah.
Can feel the player through. It's profound, especially from an electronic music perspective, where we have so limited options about that. I know you know too well what it is to play something that only it's as loud as the system can make it, rather than as loud as you want it to go.
Yeah.
Dang, well, thank you so much. It was really a pleasure to meet up again like this. It's been too long.
Yeah, totally. It's really nice to talk. I mean, I feel like we could do this forever. There's a bunch of places that we could have gone, but this was good.
Yeah.
This is good. Cool. Okay, so that's the end.
Yeah, I'll stop the recording, With you.